progresses, obviously entrepreneurs need to evolve their own leadership styles. I feel especially from 0 to 1, because you asked the question about 0 to 1 and 1 to 10. From a leadership standpoint, I would say the biggest switch happens, at least usually when founders start a business, it's either just them or them and some really junior people.
Right, okay.
More often than not, they will find themselves in a situation where they will define not only what to do, but also they will probably be the smartest person in the room in terms of deciding how to do it.
Right.
In the very early 0 to 1 stage.
Right.
Because the resources are so few, you anyways can't afford very senior people.
Sure.
I feel the biggest, I know personally also, as well as for many entrepreneurs, the biggest switch happens when you hire a first senior person.
Right.
Or a person who's equally smart or smarter than you. Because then, as a leader, it becomes important to evolve your own thinking from not only telling what to do and how to do, but telling largely what to do and letting the how to be figured out by the person you brought on board.
And even the why, right? I mean, something around purpose and cascading that.
Yeah,
right?
so I think that I feel that ends up becoming even later, because in a small enough team, usually they end up hopefully communicating so much with each other that the why is very important, but it's still not gotten to a point where you are not first person interacting with some of your team members.
Right.
I feel that point comes when you cross the number of 40-50 team members, because then you may get to a point where you may not be directly interacting with some of the team members.
Right.
And for them, then they've never met you, they've not interacted a lot with you as a founder. Then codifying the why we are doing what we are doing, hence what should we do, hence how should we be doing it, etc. Then that becomes, I would say, in the 10 to 100 journey, that becomes even more important.
Driving that clarity consistently.
Yeah. Right. And also just giving people a reason, right? Because when a team is 500 people strong or larger than that, it is understood or understandable that a founder or a group of co-founders may not be able to directly spend enough amount of time with every person in the team. And then in some ways, trying to distill, when you're interacting one-on-one, over a period of time, you kind of, whether you say it or not, you kind of start having a sense of what the person is thinking, why they're doing what they're doing, etc. But the moment you grow out of a certain size, it becomes even more important to codify some of those things so that at least every last person in the organization can understand why we do what we do.
Right. Now that's fascinating, because in summary, what I'm hearing you say is, if I was to summarize in sort of 3 big traits, I think the first you really described is what we would call, drive for results. That proven track record, excellence in something. The second, what I heard you say, is something around leadership, agility, or adaptability. So being able to constantly anticipate change, or being able to rewire yourself, course correct, based on feedback. And the third, as you build scale, it's about building a winning team, building a winning organization below.
Absolutely.
Right? So is that a fair summary?
Yeah, it's an absolutely fair summary.
Do you have a view on, there are plenty of case studies around the world where when the startups are, let's say, no longer startups, they've reached a certain scale and they've sometimes become large corporations, they sometimes tend to lose that agility, right? And one could often argue they become maybe overly bureaucratic at times. Any suggestions on how do you kind of preserve that agility across the life cycle of a company? How do you ensure that you don't go down the path of becoming like a super bureaucracy?
Yeah. Look, it's a very good question. I feel the biggest cultural change, if I may, in a startup starts coming, and coming at a point when they start hiring senior people or bringing on board senior team members for the first time.
Right.
As I was mentioning earlier, usually in the early days, I've seen it's the founders themselves, or founders and some really junior people, which is all they can afford, doing all the work. Which means that all the why, what, how, everything comes from the founder.
Yeah.
And the team is largely an execution machinery, which is enabling the organization to get things done and keep moving forward. I feel the first change point, I would say, or evolution point comes for an organization when they hire someone or they bring on board someone senior in the organization. Many times a person who has some years of experience is smarter than the founders themselves, at least in the area that they are coming for.
Sure, right.
I think that's when founders also need to go through a learning process. It's almost not too dissimilar from what a first-time manager needs to go through.
Right, yeah.
In terms of I was doing everything on my
Right.
own, I was given a certain thing to do, I was doing an excellent job.
Right.
Suddenly I'm put in a position where I can probably define the what and why and what,
Right.
but I need to hold back on my
Sure.
usual style
Yeah.
on defining the how as
How,
well,
right.
which is what I've been doing all the day till now.
Right.
But now suddenly, if I define the how of everything also to a
Yeah.
senior person who has more experience than me
Right.
or is smarter in many areas than me, that person would feel suffocated.
Right.
Because then, I mean, that person would feel like I have absolutely no
Sure.
freedom in terms of how to operate. So as a result, that's a sort of interesting learning point for the founders as well, in terms of where to draw the line, how
Right.
much to let go, and how
Right.
much to not let go. Because it's a fine balance between the two, right? At least
For
in my
sure.
mind, sort of the simplified version I've created for myself over the years is try to define why we are doing what we are doing, what we are doing
Yeah.
in sort of consultation, and also when we should be doing it. Because
Right.
again, in a early stage or a startup environment,
Right.
prioritization also becomes very
Very
important.
important, yeah.
That it's not only about why we do what we do and what to do,
Right.
but also when to do it. Some
Right.
things may be great ideas, but they may need
Yeah.
to be put on hold for 9 months. That
Yeah.
now is not the time. Now we have our plate full. Let's not do it right now. We will
Right.
do it few months later.
Right.
And rather than defining the how, which I feel suffocates smart and independent-minded people, which is
Right.
the kind of people ideally
Yeah.
a sort of good company should bring on board. But at least define the rules of do's and don'ts.
Right.
I almost see it as the equivalent of, and again, I also learnt it over a period of time. I don't like the first time I went through this process.
You didn't have a ready playbook.
We didn't have a
So-
playbook. Even if you do have a
Yeah.
playbook, I feel academically knowing it and practically implementing it
Of
are
course.
poles apart, which is why actually, although as a segue, I tell most of the early stage entrepreneurs we work with, as they start scaling the organization and start bringing on board senior people, we actually strongly advise founders to pace themselves.
Okay.
And not say that, okay, now I'm a big company, now I'm going for scaling, let me bring a senior leader for each of my 5 key functions.
Right.
We actually tell them that, you as a founder and the organization
Right.
need time to adapt to bringing on board senior people.
Right.
So we would recommend, if you're going to bring 4 senior leaders,
Right.
maybe do 1 a quarter,
Right.
stagger it over a year so that you adapt your own leadership style.
There's
and
a learning
give,
curve.
Give yourself the time to learn how to
Right.
work with sort of senior people in the company. Give the organization time to adapt to
Right.
sort of a different set of people coming into the organization, because last thing you want is everything is going fantastically well. Suddenly, as a founder, because I know how many founders think they've been doing all these things, the what, how, when, everything themselves.
Yeah.
Suddenly 5 senior people join the organization.
Right.
And you as a founder feel, okay, now I shouldn't be telling them how to do things because
Right.
that'll be coming in the way of their independence. But then actually you can feel jobless sometimes.
Right.
As a founder, okay, what do I do?
Right.
Well, I've been doing all these things myself, and now I need to delegate many of these things. So what do I do?
Right.
And you may end up over delegating also.
Right.
But just coming back to it, that's why I feel there's a sort of big learning curve involved. But at least how I've distilled it down is, not too different from maybe a game of football, where the game, as well as the sort of what is the playing field, as well as the rules of playing field, they are very important to be defined
Right.
in terms of what to do, what not to do.
Right.
Within that, then I would prefer to sort of let the team do their own thing,
Right.
as long as none of the rules are being violated. Because then that becomes sort of challenging. Let's say, for example, as an organization, we have a certain principle that, let's take e-commerce, for example, right?
Right.
That we have a certain quality standard we adhere on our products. Now, products come in all grades of quality.
Sure.
Maintaining a certain quality standard, I would consider that as a part of the rule book.
Right.
That this is our quality bar.
Right.
We can't go below this.
Right.
Above this is
That's
fine,
the
but
guardrails.
this
Yeah.
is a guardrail. Now, if I leave that also undefined,
Right.
actually sometimes the person who's bringing on board assortment may actually be confused that, okay, this quality good enough? They may actually have a different yardstick in their mind versus what you have in your mind.
Right.
And then while you've delegated most of the things, delegating this in terms of what is the guardrail, that's the equivalent of sort of telling good players that you only define the rules and you only play the game.
Right.
Then it becomes actually more complicated. So
Right.
that's why at least I try to use this analogy in most places whenever defining what to delegate and how much to delegate.
No, very, very powerful, and I think a lot of lessons here. I guess not only for startup founders, so to say, but even many other first, second, third generation entrepreneurs who are making the transition from family-led to continuing to be family-led, but then more professionally enabled or supported
Yeah.
organization.